You're listening to Faith Chats with Lydia, where we hope you will be challenged and inspired in your faith journey as you hear how God has changed the lives of ordinary people like you and me. I'm your host, Lydia Garner, and today our guest is my beautiful mother, Lynette Piper. Today we will discuss what life can look like when you come to faith as a child and have faithful parents and leave your comfort zone to serve God in a country you've never before visited. After 25 years in New Zealand and many years serving God before coming here, you can imagine she has plenty of life and ministry lessons to learn from. We hope you enjoyed today's Faith Chat, and we are so glad you are here joining us today. Let's begin. All right, welcome to the podcast, Lynette Piper, my mother.
Thank you.
Can you please start our chat today by telling us about how you began your walk with God?
Well, I was very blessed to be raised in a Christian home. And so my parents took us kids to church every week and every service. And so I heard the gospel clearly and about God and what a loving God He was through the Bible being taught and to the children, and also an example in my home. My parents were consistent and loving and kind, and so it was easy for me as a child to see God and know that He was a loving God, but yet He was a holy God, and He demanded that we be saved, that we all needed to be saved, even as a child. So I was 5 years old, and I asked Jesus to forgive me of my sins and come into my heart, and just to be part of my life, because I knew I couldn't do it on my own. So I was very blessed to have that at an early age and have a good church all my life to tell me what the Bible said and what God was like and what He demanded from us and what He wanted from us as well, and how much He loved us and would help us as we went along. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want to have anger or punishment. I wanted to do what was right, and so that God could bless me.
And how did you find that since you got saved at such a young age? Did you struggle with doubts as you got older?
I did have some doubts. Sometimes I would lay in bed and think, did I say the right words? Did I, because I didn't remember exactly what I said. So I did have some doubts, but then it would always come back to it really didn't matter what the words were. I was trusting in Christ. And so that was what it came down to, of trusting Christ, not just a prayer that was a genie prayer or something. It was trusting in Him, and I knew that God knew my heart. So I trusted in Him, not whatever I said at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, and something that a lot of people miss as they start to make it about themselves instead of about Christ. And that is something that was a main topic of conversation in the first podcast with Brent about say these words and then you're saved. And we've had hundreds of people saved because they said these words, but the fruit just wasn't there. So you were saved at a young age, you had faithful Christian parents, and you were able to grow up in a good church. How did things go for you when you became more independent and your faith had to become your own?
Well, it was a big encouragement to me as I went to public school up until 10th grade, and it was getting pretty hard in public school because obviously there weren't a lot of other Christians. I had one good friend who lived out in the country like I did. Like I said, we lived way out in the country, but it was lonely, not having many friends because I didn't do the same things that everybody else did. So in 10th grade, though, a Christian school had started up the year before at Prairie Baptist in Scotts, Michigan. And my parents decided to send me there. There was a group that came out and did a little concert thing and talked about the school. And anyway, that was such a boost to me spiritually, because it had been, I felt like I'd been on my own for a lot of those years in school and friendship and everything. But then all of a sudden, there was this, when I went to school, we were learning about God and singing about God and having friends who loved God. It was just such a boost to me. And I really appreciated that time in my life. Obviously, I had to decide all those years in public school what I was going to do. So I had lots of practice with that. So for me, it got easier later on. And then going to Bible college, obviously, I was a long way from home. And so I had to decide there, because just because you go to Christian school or Bible college doesn't mean that you're spiritual. And I know there's a lot of kids who didn't want to be there and showed that very clearly. So I had to decide there, was this real in my life? And I had just been shown such an amazing time. I had such an amazing God. I wanted to please him. It wasn't because I had to, it's because I wanted to, because he was so good to me. And I think having a loving father, especially, a lot of people don't ever have a father figure in their life even, but having such a loving father that cared for me and prayed for me when I was growing up. And of course, both of my parents being so faithful, and um, that just helped me be able to love God more. But even there, people might be in the same situation and choose not to follow God. So we all have to decide. But I had been given many opportunities to see God's goodness, and I wanted to follow him.
Nice. And I'm thankful that I've gained the benefit of being raised by someone who has continued to choose that. And did you end up using your college degree?
Yes, I majored in Bible, which we all did at the time at Maranatha Baptist Bible College, which is now Maranatha Baptist University. But so I majored in Bible and in education, and so I taught after that, but I had started teaching before that. So my dad was involved in Child Evangelism Fellowship, and he was on the board locally in Michigan. And so when I was 13, they sent me to a training camp for teaching 5-day clubs. So different people in the church would invite their neighborhood kids over. And then me, as a very experienced 13-year-old, would go and teach a Bible story and a missionary story. And that was the beginning of the real beginning of my teaching career. I did help tutor when I was in 5th grade as well, the younger kids. So I had a love for teaching and maybe bossing other people around. I don't know. But I did enjoy teaching. And so when I got my degree, um, it was a matter then of, because I was also married, after with Bible college, my husband and I were looking for where the Lord was going to send us. So he was wanting to be a youth pastor, and I wanted to teach somewhere. So it was a big, whoa, what's going to happen, Lord? Where are you going to send us? And he sent us to a very unlikely place for us, which was a big change coming from Michigan, because he sent us to Jacksonville, Florida. And that was a very big move for us. It was a long way from home, 24 hours it took us to drive. And they spoke English, but they had a different accent, different terms that they used, different foods. It was like living in a different country, really. And so that was a very stretching experience for us.
Wow. And so I guess as newlyweds, as long as you're together, you're pretty happy. But as children came along, how did you find that family and long distance separation?
Well, it was hard because, well, when I was teaching, most of the other ladies were too. But when I tried to stay home, or when I did stay home with you after you were born, and Garrett, um, there was no other ladies my age at home with their kids, because they all were working. The school that we were in had daycare starting at 6 weeks, and So there was, the ladies, there was always a demand for the ladies to be working somewhere. So that was hard. After having children, that it was quite lonely because you want to get out of the house. You want to talk to an adult. And there weren't hardly anybody, any adults left. So anyway, we found some of the really older ladies that were teaching in the daycare or helping in the daycare that were like 85 and older. But it was a learning time for me because as we talked to them, some of them would share experiences in their life and losing children and have to keep on going. And I'd end up bawling, thinking, okay, I was feeling sorry for myself, And they, just had so many more things that they had to deal with in their life. So it was a good reality check for me. But I enjoyed those times at home, being able to stay at home, but it was a bit challenging too. And being away from family is hard. We would go home once in the summer and then once at Christmas time for Christmas break. We'd drive that 24 hours straight. And Garth would drive after work and we'd go straight through it. It was a challenge to do that, but it was always good to see family. And then my parents would bring a bunch of the grandkids down in the back of the van wherever at Easter time, so at spring break. So that was nice. We would see them then as well.
They're so good about visiting. I know I've appreciated how close we've been able to be to your parents because they made those trips. So obviously we moved to where we are now. So what was the process of going from Florida to New Zealand?
So yeah, there was some dramatic things in Florida. We felt like things were going really well, and then your dad was fired from being youth pastor. And that was really devastating to us because we didn't know what we had done wrong exactly. So that was a really humbling time. But the Lord didn't lead us away from that ministry. So we ended up staying there in just different capacities. And he ended up working as a courier with a man in the church for a while. So he did really well with that. And we still went to the church and he taught adult Sunday school and, did different things. But that was really a learning time and a humbling time. But God brought us through that. And, we were just waiting for God's timing of when he wanted us to go somewhere else. And we had been up to Michigan, and some friends of ours were in a ministry over in Detroit. We went over to see them, and it ended up being an interview. And the next thing we knew, we had jobs, both of us teaching in Detroit. So that was a big surprise, one that, we weren't expecting. Obviously, my parents were happy because we'd be in Michigan, closer, still a couple hours away, but closer. But financially, it was absolutely ridiculous because Garth was making, I don't know, 48,000 a year or something. Woo! Yeah. As a courier, he was working really hard, and with us moving, we both of us teaching, which I had to go back to work because I was staying home with you kids. We were going to make half of what he was making by himself. And then our house that we had in Florida didn't sell. Of course, you never know what's going to happen with a house. It didn't sell the whole school year. We had a house payment in Florida the whole time and higher rent in Detroit. So that was two house payments, half the income with both of us working. So it was rather crazy, but we felt like God was leading us to do that. And it was during those couple of years at Faith and Warren at the time. They've moved buildings now, but that the Lord spoke to us through Bob McLean coming through at a missions conference the first year, and then he came back the second year and saying he needed help. There was a lot to do in New Zealand, and they wanted to have churches, build churches and a Christian camp and a Bible college. And so over that time we prayed and just felt like the Lord was leading us to help in New Zealand. So that's what we said we would do. After the second year of teaching there, we had gone to the mission board, Baptist World Mission, and applied and went through the interview process and everything, which was rather scary with all the questioning and everything because they wanted to make sure we were on the right page. And then after that school year, and your brother was born there in Detroit, and after he was born, we hit the road on deputation and had 2.5 years of traveling with a family of 5 to raise support to go to New Zealand. And we never visited before we went because we didn't want to waste the money. And so we saved the money to make sure we had outfit and passage and enough support to go, and so we could get there as quick as we could.
As I have children now, I understand a little better how hard that must have been. I remember very well how much you tried to get us to do schoolwork on the road.
It definitely was challenging. A lot of it is a blur, thankfully, maybe in my mind. Having a baby and homeschooling 2 children on the road is, and in different people's homes every night, is definitely challenging.
Every time we'd get in the minivan, which was totally packed with stuff, and we always had so much stuff packed around us, Garrett would climb into the back seat, open his school book, and go straight to sleep. You would be in the middle taking care of baby, Grant, and I was in the front seat with a big atlas open in my lap, acting as Dad's navigator since we didn't have to have Google Maps back then. I feel like my relationship with Dad was grown a lot in that time, as we could just talk about life as we listened to talkback radio.
Yes, you would talk about anything instead of doing your schoolwork. And now you have children. Sowing and reaping.
Oh, I suppose that's like my son now. And how often does that happen? We get children like what we were. Oh, true. And so thinking back to when you had that issue in Jacksonville, nowadays that would be labeled church hurt, and people would use it as an excuse to never go back, or maybe change denominations, or even to turn their back on their faith. But we've seen in our lives that people will fail us, and yet God is faithful. And that's something that I'm thankful that you and Dad have been faithful through the years. That has helped us, to see it doesn't matter if people hurt you because it's not about the people. It's about your relationship with God. And I appreciate that.
One thing about that, I would just give advice. We feel like a pastor can have whoever he wants as his assistant. And we've always had that view, so if he wants a different assistant or to get rid of them, he doesn't want the assistant, that's his choice. And so we honored that. But the hurtful thing was that we were told that we had offended a lot of people, but he wasn't going to say who it was. That's what really hurt us. Being fired, you feel bad, but being told you've offended a lot of people, and then you don't know who and you don't know what, that can really mess with your mind. So I'm just thankful that God helped us get through that, because we felt like if he didn't want him to be youth pastor, that was his choice. But to leave it with a load of guilt that we didn't know how to deal with, and it wasn't really biblically done, because if we have a problem with someone, we're supposed to say what the problem is and try to get it sorted. So that was, I think, the harder part of that issue, that God had to really just give us the grace to get through, even though we didn't know. We asked God, who have we offended? What can we do? And you just have to do the best you can from there. So anyway, if you're going to fire someone, do it biblically, I guess. The pastor has the right to do that, but just...
Reconciliation is needful in the healing process. Well, helpful. Not always possible, but certainly if you can at least know who to talk to, it's a big deal. And so here you are now, still in New Zealand. How are you finding it as you're in a different stage of life as grandparents? How are you finding that with one child with grandbabies in America and two with kids in New Zealand and your mom being older in America? How are you finding the separation and distance now?
Yeah, because now it's not just parents. Obviously, my dad is in heaven, so I've been separated from him for quite a while. But uh, I'm so grateful for technology because when we moved to New Zealand 25 years ago, it was the very occasional phone call, and that's how we kept up. But my parents did come every our summer, their winter for 2 months. So we had that really precious time of intense time together as they stayed with us and did ministry with us and knew our people and they knew who we were talking about. That was such a wonderful blessing because they were part of our ministry. Um, but now we have the technology where we can see each other on the phone and all that helps so much with my mother, especially being 89 now. She still usually answers her phone that we make sure she has that she can talk to us. And that is such a gift. And my sisters, they're nearby so they can help if there's problems there. But it's hard being away still, but I'm so glad that we can keep in touch and regularly, whenever I feel like it, well, at the right time zone, of course, I can call and talk and see her as well, or see the family. It is harder having new grandbabies. We have a grandson we haven't even seen yet. Being far away and not being part of their lives is really hard because I'm so glad for the 8 grandchildren we have in New Zealand that we can get to them. And, there's grab-a-seats we can fly down here as I've done this week again. We're keeping Air New Zealand going. But we can get here and pretty economically too. And Garrett and his family being on the North Island, we can drive to them. So I appreciate that, but it is hard having the long distance with a son and daughter-in-law and grandkids in the States because that's not so possible to see them. And anyway, that's hard.
Part of your identity is being a missionary wife, and you have some support groups for missionary wives, and it's a unique position. And everyone has their own unique challenges and positions in their life of ministry. Do you have any advice to a younger missionary wife or even a young pastor's wife of things that maybe you would do differently now that you're 30 years into this journey?
Well, I've learned a lot because I've had to do things I'm not equipped to do. I didn't feel equipped to do, and I've had to try to figure out. I wished I would have learned more about ladies' meetings and ladies' things. There's a lot of things that you're faced with. I had pastor's wife class in Bible college and things, but it really is beneficial, I think, especially for missionaries, to have good, intense experience in their local church or a local church in the States before they even think about going to a different country. Because when you go to a different country, you have your own cultural things and a whole lot of issues to deal with, but without worrying about just the church things. But as you know, as a new pastor's wife, there are a lot of things to deal with. Not only the people, which that's a lot right there, but just events and things that come up. How are you going to get people to come? How are you going to and what are you going to do for Mother's Day or Father's Day? There's just all these different things. And I failed because I stopped playing piano when I was a kid. And that's come back to bite me because, we have coworkers, and our coworker Leanna played the violin when we first started the church here in New Plymouth 8.5 years ago. And then they went on furlough, and it's like, oh no, there's no one to play the piano. So I would say, as hard as it is, know some musical instrument to be able, to play, because you might be the only one. And I was the only one available. So I had to go back and relearn some things from my childhood and practice, which I need to do again because they're going on furlough again. But that is out of my comfort zone completely. And I just, sometimes wonder, God, why don't you supply some of these things? I can't do everything, but sometimes you're asked to do things that are out of your comfort zone, and you just have to do the best you can until He supplies somebody else who will do it. And it sure is nice when people who have talents will offer their talents so that you don't have to do everything, whether it be teaching Sunday school or playing or singing or planning things. You can't do it all very well. And the church is meant to be a body where you're working together. So it certainly helps when people are willing to help in the ministry. And I know I've appreciated it so much, especially when people take initiative and see something that needs to be done and do it. That's just so big to me, so amazing. And especially, in new churches that are just getting started. You don't have a core group yet necessarily, or not a very big one. So just everyone feeling like they're part of it is a huge thing.
And what would you recommend for people? Because it's hard to love and serve people and often not get that love back. How have you experienced keeping on loving people even when it's hard?
Well, there again, I was so blessed having a loving home, and having my identity in Christ and knowing how much He loved me, where so many people are dealing with self-worth because they don't know God or don't feel that, don't know how much He loves them and that He created them for a purpose. But having that has helped me, especially in public school, when I was so lonely for a lot of years, knowing that God loved me and He had a purpose for me and that He was there. That has been so huge in my life. So it's not a self-confidence thing so much as a, God, you made me, you have some purpose and you will help me. And a God confidence has been huge. And when people have hurt me, have hurt us, as they, everyone gets hurt by different ones, you can get offended and but to remember, all right, God, you were hurt too. And to remember that the sacrifice that Jesus went through, him coming to earth was such an example to us because he had to grow up in a home just like we did. He didn't have perfect parents. In fact, he created his parents, which is amazing. And he was perfect. But how much he put up with. And we know he does get angry. God does get angry. And it's not always wrong to get angry against evil and against sin, but to handle that in a biblical way, that's sometimes tricky. But to just keep going and having a good marriage and having that love of my husband, unconditional love of my husband has always been huge. We have our own family, even if we've been hurt by other people outside of our family, we've had our own family and having our kids. And when you have a strong knit family, that certainly helps too, to protect from some of that outside hurt. And, with us having coworkers as well, coworkers, it can be good and it can be bad. But having good coworkers can really help in a ministry where you have people who have your back. And that is a huge thing, especially in a new ministry, having different ones that are there and that are supportive. Because when we started the church in New Plymouth, it was a really rough start. our first Sunday was a big, huge confrontation with people that we had worked with for a year, going back and forth from Rotorua, and it would have blown up. I mean, it kind of did blow up. And we actually started another church from the very first Sunday. It's like that could be devastating. And New Plymouth has had several churches in the past that have fizzled out. So it's not a very good history there, I guess. I don't know why. But having good coworkers and knowing that, God sent us here, we're going to have a church one way or another. But, oh, it was a pretty rough start. So just knowing that God has a plan, and then if you have even a few others that are supportive, that can be huge.
You have been so good at loving others because I've seen a lot of the hardships and hurt that you have survived and that you've gone through, and that you've continued to stay faithful to serving God. That perseverance and the perspective that I've been able to grow up with, it's really, really helped me as I've desired the work of the ministry. And then now I'm a pastor's wife, and understanding more of the spiritual load that adds on, it is different. And I noticed that from pretty early on. You're trying to serve them in physical, tangible ways, and you're trying to serve them in spiritual and emotional ways. And obviously you're not in charge of doing it all, and you're not in charge of their decisions or anything like that. But you are trying to serve and love them and do it well. I have seen over the course of my whole life how to do it well because of you. And I know that that's embarrassing, and you may not know what to say to that, but...
Well, I know as a parent, my desire has been for my children, not only my physical children, but then the people we minister to know God and to love Him and to serve Him, because we know how good it's been and how good He is. So when our children love and serve God, that is such a blessing back to us, especially our physical children and grandchildren. But then obviously people we're ministering to in different churches as well. That's such a blessing and such an encouragement to us. So I thank you for following, God, because then I know you'll be blessed. And that's what I want. I want my children to be blessed. And the only way we can do that is by following God. And so I am so grateful when I see that example being, followed, that you're doing what's right and want to serve God and honor Him, because then I know He'll bless you.
I'm looking forward to sharing this, and thank you for being willing to chat. And I'm thankful that you're down here visiting.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, friends, for joining us today. We hope it has offered some insight into ministry life and how to keep your eyes on Jesus rather than on the conflicts or issues around you. If you would like to chat, learn how you can support the ministry they are so faithfully serving in, or even just send a word of encouragement, you can find my email address in the show notes, and I can make sure to pass it on. If you have felt encouraged or challenged, please consider sharing this to others so they can hear today's faith chat. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button, as well as the notification bell, so you can be alerted with each new podcast as it comes out. There's no money being made. This is simply a project of love for God and a desire to share the testimonies of others. It has been such a blessing to record these inspiring testimonies, and I look forward to seeing how God continues to use them for His glory. We have no guarantee of a tomorrow, so friends, let today be the day that you sort things out between you and your Creator. Only you know what may be keeping you from the close relationship He desires to have with you. Every story is valuable, and your journey, whether you are in a valley or on a mountaintop, can be used for God's glory.